Why can these gentlemen in their 60s and 70s seem to be able to sprint without any trouble? And they look quite fast too by the looks of this video. And despite this, you as a Gaelic footballer in your 30s or even 20s seem to blow your hamstring every 6 to 9 months, much to the frustration of you, your teammates and your manager. A lot of the blame for hamstring tears these days seems to come from running technique, but I completely disagree with this. Not because running technique isn't important, it is in its own way, but to blame the hamstring tear on a certain running position is to ignore the fact that we could get stronger in that position and more flexible so you can get into that position without tearing your hamstring, which is a far better approach. Strengthen and lengthen your hamstrings.
Or tearing hamstrings. You know, people will look at gait analysis and they'll say, okay, we're striking with your heel too much and you overextended on that one and that's why you tore your hamstring. But your hamstring should be able to tolerate a heel strike the odd time when you're trying to stop yourself and change direction. Saying that your gait is the thing that's going to reduce these injuries is literally missing the forest for the trees here. Your hamstring flexibility, and as a result in this mobility or just range of motion, you should have great strength. And that's a big problem I see with GAA players in particular, and definitely rugby players as well to a degree, but the strength conditioning culture is higher in rugby, so you see that taken care of a little bit more on average. But the average GAA player who's even involved in strength training has abysmal lower body mobility. And if you can improve that while doing your strength training, you'd just be much more powerful. Your options would be a lot better for you when you get into a tussle or you're going low for a ball or you're trying to change direction faster or someone hits you or you land a little bit awkwardly. You're suddenly not in a position where you've never experienced this range of motion before. Your body's like, oh yeah, I have the elasticity for my muscles to get in there, but I've also been strength training in that range of motion so that when this happens, it's not a huge scare where your hamstring just tears apart like paper.
The average Gaelic footballer has absolutely abysmal lower body mobility and flexibility. Absolutely terrible. Most Gaelic footballers are not doing any strength training in season and most aren't doing any stretching either. But trying to do something as challenging as sprinting without preparing your body for it in any way is asking for trouble, and unfortunately it's trouble that a lot of players run into every season. Now the best way to prepare your hamstrings for sprinting and to build strong hamstrings is by actually sprinting, but we're not going to be covering that in this video because the best way to injure your hamstrings, or the most common way I should say, is also by sprinting. A lot like the best way to train your lower back is by deadlifts, but it's probably the best way to hurt your lower back too. But that works very similarly in a lot of exercises. A lot of the times the exercise that's best for a certain muscle is actually the one that people get injured on the most. Now I'm going to use a second here to bring up a Charles Poliquin quote he had about sports. Now Charles Poliquin trained Olympic athletes and has Olympic medalists in more sports than any other coach in history. So his quote was, and I'll try and find it and put it up here, basically, the more dynamic a sport is, or the movements in a sport, then the more variety you're going to need in the weight room to prepare for that sport. The more ranges of motion and variety you're going to need. Gaelic football, the movements are unbelievably dynamic and varied. From catching a ball to picking a ball off the ground to getting tackled or tackling, changing direction, dummying. The movements are absolutely crazy and they're done at such a high speed. If you can't even spend a few hours every week preparing your body for those extremely dynamic movements, you're asking for trouble. And it's nobody who's going to get through their career without preparing their body without any hamstring tears. I personally have never torn my hamstring, and I've had many fitness challenges and I do a lot of plyometrics and sprints and things like that as well, but I haven't played Gaelic football in a long time, so I haven't been tested in that way. So this video is going to cover, in the weight room, in strength training sessions, how do we make your hamstrings and your hip flexors a lot stronger and more flexible at the same time. I've been doing this exact thing with Gaelic footballers for 16 years now. And in the last few years, I'm getting more and more people coming to me as kind of a rehab after their injuries. Now, I'm not a physio and I don't pretend to be one on the internet, but I do know that once you get the all clear to go back playing football from your physio or from your doctor or whoever it might be that was dealing with you, you have a long way to go before your hamstrings, your hips, your knees, whatever it is extremely strong and flexible again. There's a big gap between just not being injured anymore and being as strong and flexible as you can possibly be. This is where I come in. I can make you very, very strong, and very, very flexible. And today's video is going to cover how to do that in the hamstrings and hip flexors specifically, with the huge reward being that you are massively reducing the chances of you injuring your hamstrings in the first place or in the future if you've already injured them before. Now, completely eradicating injuries like hamstring tears in Gaelic football is a completely unrealistic goal. Every field sport in the world, the most common injury is tearing your hamstrings. So it's not a problem that's exclusive to Gaelic football. It happens in soccer, American football, rugby. Tearing your hamstring is an extremely common injury. But the information and the methods we're going to talk about today are going to massively reduce the chances of that dreaded hamstring tear from happening in the first place. So let me start the video by saying I went to a course with Dr. Hassan Zaid, one of the best chiropractors in the world, about 11 years ago now, in one of the most exclusive gyms in the world at the time, Ultimate Performance Mayfair. Hassan is a world-class chiropractor who can squat 350 kg, but more important than that, he's an extremely successful chiropractor. And at the time he did the seminar, he was working with the German national sprinting team. But two of the fastest white men in the world from Germany had torn their hamstrings 12 weeks before the World Championships, and then they started working with Hassan Zaid, and he got them back sprinting within 12 weeks. The seminar we did that day, in Hassan's own words, a lot like me to be honest as a PT, he said 95% of people could be completely cured or fixed with just what he covered that day in the seminar. Now I would actually relate that to personal training. 95% of clients don't need any special or magic methods. The basics will work for 95% of people. So he had his 95% of clients will work with what he covered that day in the seminar, and we'll be covering that in detail. But the most important thing that he explained that day that's massively helped me with all of my PT clients since is the difference between short tight and long tight in the hips. It's a very simple explanation I'm going to go through with you now. So basically, you've all heard of anterior pelvic tilt, where your hips get very tight and you start sticking your ass out like a duck, or like a girl wearing high heels. Your hips will go back like this and you'll have that arch. And while at the front, your hip flexors will be very tight from sitting or from kicking, or from many things can make your hip flexors tight, but it will be a short tight. So they'll be tight, or they'll feel tight because they're short. Now you know the feeling of having tight hamstrings. My hamstring feels very tight. And that's a different tightness to the tightness at the front. So if you think about your hips doing this, short tight at the front in your hip flexors, long tight at the back of your hamstrings. So if you have tight hamstrings and they're long tight, and you aim to stretch them out or stretch them even further statically, you can actually make the problem worse. So it's not that stretching is bad, it's stretching the hamstrings, and having this massive flexibility and balance between the front and the back will make your hamstrings very likely to tear. It's also going to stop your glutes from working as hard as they should. Gluteal amnesia, the famous phrase, or activating your glutes. So your back arches like this. Your back is on being overworked, your glutes are being underworked, and your hamstrings feel very tight. So the solution to this that he explained that day, that I have used with so many people since, like hundreds of people between PT sessions and Gaelic footballers, is just to stretch out the hip flexors, make them extremely flexible, and do a lot of work on making the glutes and hamstrings very strong. Now you still want to stretch both sides and you still want to strengthen both sides, but fixing that flexibility and strength and balance between the hip flexors and the hamstrings and glutes is absolutely crucial to fixing your lower back pain, reducing the chances of you tearing your hamstrings, and making your hamstrings and glutes way stronger. You can be doing the right exercises, but if you don't fix that flexibility and balance, you're not going to be getting as much out of the glute work and the hamstring work. So that gets us started with the hamstring exercises. So the knee bend is your bicep femoris, or your leg bicep. So just like your bicep does that at the front in your arm, at the back in your leg, it does the leg bicep. This first function of your hamstrings is going to be worked by hamstring exercises where your knee bends or your knee is bent. So you have all the types of leg curls: seated leg curl, standing leg curl, lying leg curl. Any type of leg curl is going to work this very hard. And then you also have Nordics. Now, Nordics have been well studied to be absolutely excellent at strengthening the hamstrings, and in a lot of studies massively reducing the chances of you tearing your hamstrings, especially in soccer. A lot of the studies on Nordics come from soccer. They massively reduce the chance of you tearing hamstrings. But there was a recent study that put seated leg curls, because you're in the lengthened position, even better than Nordics. My solution is just to do all three of them. No one wants to do one exercise for the rest of their life. You know, go from phases, month to month, or every couple of months, change from one to the other. Charles Poliquin absolutely loved lying leg curls for the exact same reason, to help you get stronger at squats and to strengthen your hamstrings and stop them from getting injured. The benefit of doing machine leg curls here as well is you can do single leg variations. Single leg seated hamstring curls and lying leg curls. The second group of exercises, or the second function of the hamstring goes out in front of you when you're running, and as you foot strike, it pulls your body forward or extends your hips. Now, I'm not going to go into jargon on all these technical terms when it comes to hip extension, flexion, all that. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible, because this is the part where a lot of people get overwhelmed and often feel powerless to change things. So just think about it, your hip extends, and when you're doing a good morning or an RDL, you're training hip extension. The best exercises for training hip extension that are going to massively reduce the chances of you tearing your hamstring, but also build power and strength in your glutes and hamstrings so that you can run faster and jump higher and change direction faster, is the RDL, the good morning, the 45-degree back extension, and reverse hypers. Now, I have hip thrust and single leg hip thrust here as well. But remember, single leg hip thrust or hip thrust isn't technically a hinge like the first four, because your knee is bent. So you're extending the hips, but your knee is bent. So it's slightly different, but it's still a hip extension exercise. Now, I absolutely love a certain exercise for the hamstrings that's very rarely used. It's the single leg good morning. It's extremely challenging, even with low weight. When I started to do this exercise, I couldn't believe the difference it made to the strength of my hamstrings and the flexibility of my hamstrings. So it's very underutilized, but it's excellent, and it's not something you should start on. Now, some strength standards for these. For the RDL, you should be able to do 1.5 times body weight for 6 to 8 reps. So if you weigh 80 kg, you should be able to do 120 kg. For the good morning, you should be able to do 50% of your body weight for 20 reps. Higher rep sets are very beneficial here on the good morning and the back extension. So if you weigh 80, that would be 40 kg for 20 reps. For the 45-degree back extension, half your body weight, so you should be able to hold 40 kg and do 20 reps. And single leg hip thrust, you should be able to do 20 reps. The guys I train at the beginning, they are so far off those strength standards, which are not that difficult or challenging to get to if you're consistent with training. It is unbelievable. They are so far off it. They start working their hamstrings and their glutes with these exercises for the first time. They can't believe how far they are off the strength standards and how fast they can climb, because they've never even trained their hamstrings properly before. Then moving on to your hip flexors. A lot of people with hip flexors, they only think of stretching them, and they don't think of making them stronger. So you have to think strengthen and lengthen, not just stretch them. So to stretch them, we'll go through in a moment, but to strengthen your hip flexors, the ATG split squat and the L-sit are absolutely excellent. If you can do an L-sit, you hit those strength targets on the hamstring and the hip extension exercises, and you could do 20 kg dumbbells in each hand on the ATG split squat, you would notice an enormous difference, lads, on your hamstrings and your hips. They would feel completely different. Your back pain would vanish. You'd feel way faster and stronger, and you wouldn't be second guessing your ability to change direction or go for an all-out sprint on training or match days. When it comes to flexibility, it couldn't be simpler. It's hard work and you have to be patient, but flexibility does improve very, very quickly. It's uncomfortable rather than hard work, I'll say. But elephant walks are an excellent hamstring exercise. You can start with the box or the plate pretty high off the ground, or even up onto a chair, and straighten out your legs like that. And then you're moving closer and closer till your hands are on the ground. Then the standing pike, just standing in that position, can be very, very difficult for a lot of people starting off, but it does improve very, very quickly. And then Kang squats. So a lot of people won't have done these before, or will be brand new to them, but they're absolutely excellent. There's people who can do these with extremely heavy weight, but you can do them just body weight at the beginning, and they actually make a great warm-up drill too. Okay, so back to finish the video on day 2. I'm back to finish it on day 2, interestingly, because I just started using an app blocker on my phone. It's called Opal. I'll link it here. A couple of weeks ago, and I was tried to finish my video last night and I couldn't break it. So if you're interested in app blockers so you can get to sleep on time or work more productively, I'm trying this one and I'm actually finding it really good. But back to day 2. We were on the flexibility and the hip flexor stretches. So for hip flexor stretches, the 3 that I absolutely love is couch stretch, which I think is the most important stretch for anybody in any situation. Nearly every single client that comes to me in the gym, footballer or not, has very tight hip flexors. So make sure you do the couch stretch for 2 minutes each side every night for at least a month. It'll completely change your flexibility in your hips. Then the lunge, not quite the long lunge, it's just you hold that position, long stride. I find that an excellent stretch on the back hip flexor, especially you're extending that back leg and squeezing your glute as hard as you can. And then finally the lying quad stretch. I haven't seen too many people do this before, but I learned about it 3 or 4 years ago and it's absolutely excellent. I love this one personally myself, the lying quad stretch. Just make sure, you might not be able to see it there in the video, but you have a yoga block underneath your glute there and your hips are up a little bit higher on one side, and that massive stretch on the hip flexor and the quad on that lying leg. And finally, the ultimate exercise for preventing hamstring tears in conjunction with the rest, but I think this is your secret weapon. It's called the long lunge. It's absolutely incredible. You're basically holding a position where the front leg is going to be stretching the hamstring and holding you there isometrically, and then the back leg is going to be stretching the hip flexor and holding an isometric contraction there. This is just incredible. And the great thing about the long lunge is you can very simply just start it with your legs closer together if your flexibility is pretty poor, and then as your flexibility gets better and better, you step out further and further. This is a super one for preventing hamstring tears, as that is the position in the heel strike when the leg is out in front where a lot of people tear their hamstring, when that front foot starts dragging the rest of your body forward. So the long lunge is absolutely incredible in that lengthened, in that extreme position on the forward leg, and then strength and flexibility gains on that back hip flexor as well. So I hope today's video will make you feel far more empowered when it comes to the dreaded hamstring injury. Remember, like I said earlier, this is the most common injury in all field sports, not just Gaelic football. But there is plenty you can do in the gym between strength exercises, emphasizing a full range of motion, and certain stretches and isometric holds that can massively reduce the chances of you getting injured while sprinting. Sprint exposure obviously is absolutely key. If you want to get good at sprinting, you have to sprint. But these are the interventions you can do in the gym, strength training wise, flexibility wise, that will massively lower the chances of that injury occurring or reoccurring. Let's go.